Well, hello everyone, and as I always say, this week the corners were good. So we're going to go into the stats that I have started putting together. So this week in NFL, based on last week's games, there were 8 safeties and cornerbacks that were tied for number 1 for interceptions in the league with 3 interceptions each. We have someone that's returning to the top 3, and we have 2 new ones. Coming in at number 1 from Houston, his name is Steven Nelson. He had 20 solo tackles, 4 assists, 5 passes deflected, and he's had 3 interceptions for a total of 33 yards. Coming in at number 2 is Darius Williams from Jacksonville. He had 20 solo tackles also. He's had 3 assists. He's also had 1 tackle for a loss. He's had 9 pass deflections, and he also has 3 interceptions for 61 yards. And getting back to the top 3 is Deron Bland from the Cowboys. So all you Cowboy fans are probably cheering somewhere. 18 solo tackles, 4 assists, 1 tackle for a loss, 7 pass deflections, and 3 interceptions for 86 yards. Now, I decided to do something interesting because this stat also kind of caught my attention too. If you're just going for a touchdown return, Bland is number 1. He leads with 2 touchdowns based off of his interceptions, and that is the top corners, or the top corners of the week. Now, as you can also see, there's a little bit, we're bringing back the gambling conversation again, because a lot of people are talking about, like, why do they have the zero tolerance law? Why is gambling allowed when they have the NFL, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to talk about a couple of cases in which you'll understand why the NFL has a zero tolerance rule when it comes to gambling. One of the first ones that they suspended for gambling is none other than Mongo himself from Blazing Saddles, Mr. Alex Karras, who's from Detroit. Other people may know him as the dad from Webster. That's how I first got introduced to him. And then my dad reminded me that I'd seen him a number of times in Blazing Saddles because I watched that show with him. Now, he got suspended by the NFL for a year because he owned a bar in Detroit called Lindell's AC Bar. And the NFL got word that there was some problems going on with that bar, and that there might be some gambling, and there could also be some possible organized crime issues with the bar. So at first he was going to fight it, but then he ended up taking the suspension. And he admitted that he'd been placing bets on NFL games, and he was suspended for 1 year, along with Paul Hornig, who the Packer fans are going to know who he is. He was the running back at the time for the Packers. And in 1964, when he was back playing for the Lions, he was amongst one of the people that was supposed to call the coin toss. He refused, and he said to the refs, "I'm sorry, sir, I'm not permitted to gamble." And he said, someone else is going to have to call the coin toss. Now, I'm calling this the art of gambling because our lovely OG gave me the idea for this. And I at first was like, oh, this is kind of an interesting thing. When I looked into this guy, I was like, oh, this is why we have the gambling zero tolerance policy. I am referring to the man that was drafted 4th overall in the 1982 NFL draft. He went to the Colts QB. His name was Art Schlichter. He only played 13 games and had 6 starts in his entire NFL career. He later played for the AFL. But like with the NFL, he was forced out of the AFL for gambling issues. He also served 10 years for gambling related theft that came about from a 2011 ticket swapping situation that he was doing at Ohio State games. All right. So, Art, how bad did it get? It got bad. His gambling began in high school when he would go to the horse track and bet on horses. And then by the time he was a junior in college, he was betting on college and pro sports. And as a matter of fact, when he was at Ohio State, both the Columbus police and the state police had gone to OSU and said, "We think you have a problem with this guy. He's gambling so much." But OSU, and I'm not shocked by this at all, decided, hey, you know what? You don't have enough evidence. So they let it go. So he gets to the NFL. Like I said, he's drafted in 1982. I'm going to hit some of the highlights because look this guy up. It's funny. Not funny. It's tragic. But he blew his entire $350,000 bonus with the Colts by mid-season his rookie year. By the end of the 1982 strike, he had over $700,000 in gambling debts. He lost $20,000 alone his first week as a rookie. And what he kept doing is what you always hear with gambling is he kept gambling again to try and win back the money he'd already lost. From the winter of 1982 to the spring of 1983, he had a $489,000 gambling debt on basketball games. And remember, at this time, the NFL had a strict no gambling policy. You couldn't bet on anything at this time. And his bookies were threatening to expose him to both the Colts and to the NFL. When that happened, he went to the FBI and gave a testimony against the bookies because gambling was illegal in Indiana at that time. And he went to the NFL also because he feared he was going to be asked to throw games at this point. And that is why there is this zero tolerance policy when it comes to this stuff. Is the NFL doesn't want their players to get so far behind that they're going to end up like this guy, where they're going to be asked to shave points or throw a game or do something like that. So it's a zero tolerance policy. He was initially suspended indefinitely, but then Rozelle reduced it to 13 months, his suspension. He was then reinstated in 1984, but he was released by the Colts in 1985 because there were rumors he was gambling again. Now, how he got caught on that is he made a bet with a golf partner that he lost. He wrote a check for $2,000 to the partner, asked that person not to cash it until after the season was over. And then the guy he owed the money to called the Colts up and asked them if the check was good. And that was the point at which the Colts released him. In 1987, he pled guilty to illegal gambling. And at this point, he's roaming around with the USFL, with the AFL, those kinds of things. He's playing with those guys. The Bengals were trying to bring him as a backup to Boomer Esiason at this point, but Rozelle vetoed that because of he pled guilty to illegal gambling. Let's see, 1984, he was charged with embezzlement from the radio station that he was working on. And then in 2007, he gave an interview in which he said that it's estimated that he stole about $1.5 million during his entire, up to that point in his career. And at this point, he's now living in Vegas because Vegas was where you could gamble legally. Now, I alluded to that he did time in 2011, and this is at this point, he was caught gambling. He was in prison. He got caught gambling in prison. He got caught gambling in everywhere. He started a nonprofit that was supposed to help players with their gambling habits. So, like I said, look this guy up. This is why there is the zero tolerance policy that there is because this guy, I'd never heard of him. And I think the reason why I hadn't heard of him is because, well, I wasn't a Colts fan and I wasn't really watching a lot of football at this time. But I think a lot of these older gambling issues, these old suspensions, a lot of this got shoved under the table because they didn't want anyone looking into what was going on. So here's our zero tolerance policy. Here's our poster child for this issue. Okay. You're not wrong, Nathan. You're not wrong. But here's the thing. They know the rules when they sign up. They know they can't do this stuff. They're still doing it. So they're going to get suspended. So in my opinion, it's like, well, we're supposed to all follow the rules. If we're not all following the rules, then what's the rule there for? So until the NFL changes their policy on gambling, it's going to continue to be this way. I just thought this might be because there's some questions like, why are we doing this? Why is this zero tolerance? Why are they like this? Because essentially, like what I've alluded to, it's not that they don't have a problem that they want to gamble on a basketball game or stuff like that. They don't want the players to do anything that could call into question the integrity of the players, the teams, the owners, or the league. Integrity is bigger. No, I try to say that with a straight face, and I can't really say it with a straight
Anthony.
Face. But this issue, that's why it is where it is. So again, Art Schlichter, look him up on Wikipedia. It'll take you 20 minutes just to read through the Wikipedia page because it's just, I mean, his 2011 conviction, I didn't even go into that part of it. And that's just crazy. There, if you want to watch it, he actually was an episode on the show American Greed. So you can actually watch video and all of this stuff. It's nuts. The guy had an addiction. Essentially, he had an addiction. And instead of trying to treat the addiction, they just kind of kept pushing the ball down the road. All right. So that's the corner office.
No pun intended with the pushing the ball down the road.